And we begin with breaking news. I'm Trace Gallagher in for Shepard Smith. Jurors in the Paul Manafort trial say they want to go home early. That's what a source tells our team inside the courtroom. The jury passing a note minutes ago. It comes during a second day of deliberations on the fate of President Trump's former campaign chairman. Still no verdict, but President Trump has made up his mind. He defended Manafort today and called him a, quote, good person. Manafort facing 18 charges of bank and tax fraud and the possibility of life behind bars. Here's what the president said earlier today.
The whole Manafort trial is very sad. When you look at what's going on there, I think it's a very sad day for our country.
The president made those comments to reporters as he was leaving the White House this morning, about 10 miles from the scene where jurors are deliberating Manafort's fate. Prosecutors with special counsel Robert Mueller say Manafort ran a multi-million. In fact, we have breaking news. The defense attorney is speaking right now. Let's go to that and listen. Yeah, so the jurors apparently have just left for the day. They're on their way out. The defense attorneys didn't say anything to the cameras. You'll recall yesterday the jurors asked a couple of questions. One was about the documents and how they pertain to the various counts. And the other one, they wanted a redefinition of reasonable doubt, the definition of reasonable doubt. At that time, the defense attorneys came out after those questions were asked, and they said it was a victory for Paul Manafort. It was a good day for them. They believe that boded well for their defense. And you see today there was nothing at all from the defense attorneys and still no word from the court. Remember, Paul Manafort ran a multi-million-dollar tax and bank fraud scheme. The defense argues that Manafort left many of the details of his finances to other people. Manafort has pleaded not guilty to all charges. A source close to the Manafort defense team says the longer we wait for a verdict, the better it could be for President Trump's former campaign chairman. We'll have more on that in a moment. Meantime, we have Team Fox coverage on today's headlines out of D.C. The Fox Business Network's Blake Berman has more on President Trump canceling that controversial military parade. And White House correspondent Kevin Corke has more on the president's comments. But first, live to Peter Ducey. He's at the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, with the latest on the jury deliberations and them leaving. Peter.
Trace, this is brand new information. The jury sent a note to the judge asking if they could leave today at 5 p.m. because one of the jurors has an event. So obviously that suggests that they are not ready to have a verdict done. They just want to end deliberations today by 5 p.m. On the way out just now, Paul Manafort's lead defense attorney, Kevin Downing, told our crew that he does not know if that means that the jury is deadlocked inside. But earlier today, he said that he thinks the longer that these deliberations drag on, the better for Paul Manafort.
Do you view the continued deliberations as a good sign for the defense?
It's a great sign for the defense. Thank you.
Judge Ellis said a verdict could be coming soon. Do you think that will be today, Mr. Downing?
I don't know.
A source close to the defense told me this morning it was their understanding that the Mueller team was ready in their closing arguments to present jurors with a sort of key so they could easily match pieces of evidence to the corresponding charge. But for some reason, they never introduced it. And that is essentially what the jury asked the judge for yesterday. But he told them they were on their own with the evidence. Trace?
And Peter, the judge responding after some news organizations requested the release of some sealed information, apparently.
Right. He turned down some news organizations because a handful of them, including the New York Times and AP and the Washington Post, filed a motion to intervene. They wanted the judge to unseal everything that's been said at bench conferences, which the Mueller team and the prosecution agree isn't necessary right now. And these outlets also wanted the judge to unseal the names of the trial's jurors, which Judge Ellis said he could not do without risking their personal safety. And when the lawyer for these news organizations pushed back and asked how their safety might be threatened, the judge said there have been threats and that he's now got U.S. Marshals going with him everywhere that he goes. And that is brand new as the trial has worn on, because on one of the first days, our Justice Department producer Jake Gibson saw Judge Ellis leaving a grocery store carrying his own bag, no U.S. Marshals in tow. Trace?
Yeah, Peter Ducey, live for us at the courthouse. Back to you when breaking news happens. We should note the jury has said they want to leave at 5 o'clock today. The defense attorneys have already left the courthouse. We are waiting for the prosecutors to leave. There is word a juror may have an event they want to attend, which is an indication, as Peter said, there will be no verdict today. It's unclear if they'll begin deliberating again tomorrow morning. The judge has said they could do that, or they'll pick this back up on Monday. We'll continue to cover breaking news coming out of Arlington, Virginia, as it comes in. Meantime, President Trump threatening to revoke even more security clearances, even though he is facing growing backlash for doing just that to former CIA Director John Brennan. The president now taking aim at a career Justice Department official named Bruce Orr, whose wife has done work for Fusion GPS. That's the research company behind the infamous dossier claiming ties between President Trump and Russia. President Trump has accused Bruce Orr of being involved.
I think Bruce Orr is a disgrace. I suspect I'll be taking it away very quickly. I think that Bruce Orr is a disgrace with his wife Nellie. For him to be in the Justice Department and to be doing what he did, that is a disgrace.
Important to note, we have seen no evidence at all so far that Bruce Orr helped dig up damaging information on the president. Orr is just one of several current and former officials whose security clearances are under review by the White House. Critics are accusing President Trump of trying to silence people who challenge him. A dozen former top intelligence officials, including CIA directors who served under Republican presidents, have now come together to condemn the president's actions. Our White House correspondent Kevin Corke is live for us at the White House. Kevin.
Trace, the argument the White House is making when you ask about whether or not this is purely political is, listen, the list of people could change depending on circumstance. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't answer the question, why does it seem like all the people currently listed, you just showed a graphic, are all critics, at least to some degree, of the President of the United States, perhaps with the notable exception of Bruce Orr, who we have not seen, at least publicly, him criticize the president. Now, the president did talk about this before making his way up to the tri-state area for a working weekend in New Jersey. And he is criticizing not only John Brennan, the former CIA director, but Bruce Orr as well. But I want to share first what he had to say about John Brennan, who, as you know, lost his security clearance yesterday.
There's no silence. If anything, I'm giving him a bigger voice. Many people don't even know who he is, and now he has a bigger voice, and that's okay with me because I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him.
He said he never respected the former CIA director. Now, I want to make mention for the folks at home the number of people, and there's some pretty significant names, Trace, who signed that letter that you cited. We're talking about Porter Goss, David Petraeus, Michael Hayden, George Tenet, just Leon Panetta. A veritable who's who of former directors who all signed that letter, again saying this is about have more on the security clearance status of Bruce Orr. As soon as I get something, I'll be sure to pass it along, but for now, back to you.
We'll go back to you then. Kevin Corke live for us on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. President Trump canceling plans for a controversial military parade this fall in D.C. He blamed local politicians for what he called the ridiculously high cost of the event. The Fox Business Network's Blake Berman is live for us at the White House. Blake.
Hi there, Trace, and away we go. The idea of a military parade has long intrigued President Trump, dating back to when he went to France in the middle of last year for Bastille Day. But since then, there have been questions as to whether or not a parade here, similar to that of what happened in France, is necessary. And if so, what exactly is the price tag? There was a report out yesterday saying that the price could be somewhere in the area of some $92 million. But at the time when asked about it, the Defense Secretary Jim Mattis pushed back by saying whoever is saying that is, quote, probably smoking something. Hours after that, the Pentagon put out a statement saying that a parade that the president would want would not happen at any point this year. And the president took to Twitter earlier this morning saying instead he would go to a parade at Joint Base Andrews and in November of this year go to France to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the ending of World War I. And this was part of his response earlier today on Twitter. The president writing, quote, "The local politicians who run Washington, D.C. poorly know a windfall when they see it. When asked to give us a price for holding a great celebratory military parade, they wanted a number so ridiculously high that I canceled it. Never let someone hold you up." The mayor here in Washington, D.C. is Muriel Bowser. She is a Democrat, and this was how she responded shortly after. Quote, "Yep, I'm Muriel Bowser, mayor of Washington, D.C., the local politician who finally got through to the reality star in the White House with the realities, $21.6 million of parades, events, demonstrations in Trump America." She ends by writing, "Sad." Bottom line, Trace, with this, no parade that the president at least wanted here on the streets of Washington, D.C. this year, and the price tag still remains to be seen, Trace.
Yeah, and Blake, you asked the president about how companies report their earnings.
Right. The president also took to Twitter this morning saying that he would like to see the Securities and Exchange Commission look into the possibility of companies only having to report twice this year. Currently, publicly traded companies, as you might know, have to report 4 times a year. And the president said he got this idea from the outgoing CEO at Pepsi, Indra Nooyi, last week when he was hosting business leaders at his place over in Bedminster. And the president seemed to endorse this concept earlier today of companies only having to report 2 times a year. Listen here.
I'd like to see twice, but we're going to see. And I thought of it, and it made sense to me, because, you know, we are not thinking far enough out. We've been accused of that for a long time, this country. So we're looking at that very, very seriously. We're looking at twice a year instead of 4 times a year.
So, Trace, the SEC is going to study this issue, but there are still a lot of questions with this, especially since you are talking about a lot of money here, potentially, including when might the SEC start this study? When might they wrap it up? And, of course, the big one, what might it lead to? Trace?
It is a bunch of dough. Blake Berman live for us on the North Lawn. Blake, thank you. Up next, we'll talk about all of this with Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace. From the president's comments sympathizing with Paul Manafort to the controversy over security clearances. That's all ahead on this summer Friday afternoon. Shepard Smith reporting. More now on a very busy news day in Washington, day 2 of jury deliberations, and we're still waiting for a verdict in the trial of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. And President Trump says he hasn't finished revoking security clearances of current and former officials despite some serious backlash. Let's bring in Chris Wallace. He is the anchor of Fox News Sunday. Chris, great to see you. You know, you look at all this, the president is saying today that, you know, he's not trying to silence his critics. In fact, he is giving Paul Manafort, we got Paul Manafort in the brain because the jury's still out. He is giving John Brennan a bigger platform. And the truth is he is. I mean, John Brennan is everywhere today. Twitter, newspapers, television. The question becomes, is the president secretly enjoying this? Does he want to build up John Brennan as his new big rival?
I certainly think that's a possibility. I'm not going to say that he's trying to do it because I don't know. Nobody has told me that. But it certainly seems likely. I mean, the president likes to pick the foils, the people, the opponents that he feels most comfortable with. I don't think it's a surprise that he keeps calling Maxine Waters a leader of the Democratic Party. She isn't, but he likes to call her that, and I think he thinks that he's just fine debating Maxine Waters. And I think to a certain degree he's perfectly comfortable with John Brennan being seen as a leader of the resistance and dealing with him. The problem is that when you go after John Brennan, it doesn't just stay there. You saw today that Bill McRaven, the former chairman of the U.S. Special Operations Command, who was in charge of the bin Laden raid, he went after President Trump and said, please revoke my security clearance because I want to be in the same group with John Brennan. A dozen former security officials, including Bob Gates, who was defense secretary for George W. Bush and Barack Obama, said that he was opposed to what the president had done, pulling Brennan's security clearance. So that's the problem. Sometimes you open that door and you don't know who's going to come out. It may be John Brennan and a bunch of his friends.
What are the repercussions of that, Chris? When you talk about a dozen people, and by my count, it could be higher, maybe 13, 14, 15 people who have come out and joined that list now, as the White House kind of moves forward with this list, and Bruce Orr is now a brand new name, not a new name, but maybe the next person to get his security clearance revoked. What does that do to the White House going forward?
Well, I think it depends what the White House does. Remember, the president, all he has done is move against Brennan, and I think the controversy stays where it is. If, on the other hand, he begins to go after some of these other people who have not been, I mean, the one thing about Brennan even if you think that it was wrong to revoke his security clearances, he has crossed a line that no other of those officials have in terms of being nakedly partisan in going after President Trump. He has accused him of high crimes and misdemeanors. He's accused him of treason in the way he handled Putin at the Helsinki summit. People like Michael Hayden, another former CIA director, much more mild, tough, but much more mild in his criticism. If he starts going after more of them, then I think this will only escalate. And one of the concerns in Washington people are talking about is, would the president revoke the security clearances of Robert Mueller and some of the people on his investigatory team? Because that's a way he could stop this investigation without actually firing Mueller.
You know, we did this story earlier in the week, and I spent about 15 minutes talking with a national security expert about why these former officials need these security clearances, and I got some answers, but not really good answers. Has somebody given you a good answer of why these security clearances need to remain in place in the first point?
Well, here's the thing, and it really speaks to a different era in our politics than the one we have now. It used to be that when you had a Secretary of State or a CIA director, that somebody might think that they were useful, and when a new administration comes in, even if it's one of the different party, they might at some point want to call that person in and ask for their advice on the Middle East or Russia or terrorism, some pressing issue. And if you want to share classified information with them, they don't get it automatically, even if they have a security clearance. It just means that if you want to share it with them, they have the clearance to be able to read it. In today's Washington, no one would ever dream of the Trump administration asking advice or help from the Obama administration. So maybe it seems a little bit more out of date, but it's the way that the system used to work. And I think it's actually a good idea that you'd like to get advice from people who've been in those jobs before.
Yeah, and there are some views that say you can just kind of give these temporary, you can reinstate these security clearances if it's needed on certain issues. Chris Wallace, Fox News Sunday. Chris, thank you very much. This weekend on Fox News Sunday, Chris will speak with former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair Admiral Mike Mullen, also Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wyoming, and the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, as well as White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney. That's this Sunday on your local Fox station. Check your local listings for times. Well, the U.S. military facing new threats on two levels. Coming up, reported laser attacks on U.S. Air Force pilots, plus another country's military preparing for possible strikes against American targets. Next.
I'd like to take a moment.
The United States military facing new threats from around the globe, including some high-tech attacks on U.S. Air Force pilots in the Middle East. More on that in a moment. But first, Pentagon officials say the Chinese military is likely training for strikes on American targets. A new report shows the Chinese army has been practicing for potential long-range bombing missions. The national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live for us at the Pentagon with more. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Trace. Well, this annual Pentagon report to Congress warns China's military is likely training for strikes on U.S. targets, as you mentioned. The People's Liberation Army, quote, has rapidly expanded its overwater bomber operating areas, gaining experience in critical maritime regions and likely training for strikes against U.S. and allied targets. The Chinese Air Force has also shifted to a nuclear mission, according to the report. In May, Chinese strategic bombers landed for the first time on the disputed Woody Islands, a dramatic expansion of Chinese military claims in the oil-rich South China Sea. China signed a 99-year lease last year for a port in Sri Lanka, which could be used for its military. A year ago, China opened its first overseas military base in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa, deploying a company of Marines and equipment next door to a U.S. drone base in the Horn of Africa. The report said cyber attacks from China continue on computer systems around the world, including those owned by the U.S. government. The Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to the Pentagon report, accusing the U.S. of displaying a Cold War mentality, Trace.
And Jennifer, military officials say there's been a rise in laser attacks on U.S. military pilots?
That's right. We've reported in the past year about Pentagon concerns about laser beam attacks routinely blinding pilots who are taking off and landing next to the Chinese base in Djibouti. But now new figures for laser beam attacks targeting U.S. military pilots in the Middle East show the incidents are on the rise there. The number of lasing incidents in the CENTCOM region was around 700 in 2015. In 2016, there were an estimated 600 laser attacks, followed by 400 in 2017 and about 350 so far this year. The preponderance of lasing incidents have occurred near major population centers in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, according to CENTCOM chief spokesman Captain William Urban. It is exceedingly difficult to pinpoint the origin of a short laser engagement, so we can't definitively source most laser attacks, though we assess that most come from insurgents and terror organizations in the region. The story was first reported by the Wall Street Journal. Trace?
Jennifer Griffin live for us at the Pentagon. Jen, thank you. President Trump slamming New York Governor Andrew Cuomo over his comment that America was never that great. Now the governor walking back a bit. We'll take you to New Jersey as we wait for the president to arrive at his golf club there for the weekend. Next. A Fox report now, more of today's headlines. Family and friends remembering their loved ones who died in this week's bridge disaster in Italy. A church in Naples holding services today for some of the victims. The bridge collapse killed at least 38 people. Officials are planning a state funeral for this weekend. The man responsible for a mass shooting at a Florida airport will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Back in January of last year, Esteban Santiago opened fire in a baggage area at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. 5 people died, 6 others injured. Santiago pleaded guilty as part of a deal to avoid the death penalty. And don't look now, some brave folks in China got quite a view from a new suspension bridge today. It's because the bottom is made of glass. The bridge is more than 1,000 feet long and hangs 500 feet above ground. One visitor described the experience as fabulous. The news continues. Well, President Trump landing moments ago in New Jersey. He's heading to his golf club in Bedminster, about 30 miles outside of New York City. The president is coming from New York after a campaign fundraiser in the Hamptons. That after he blasted New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Twitter today. Ellison Barber is live in Berkeley Heights, not far from where the president is staying this weekend. Ellison.
Hi, Trey. So we've heard from Cuomo or Cuomo's team a couple times in response to this controversy over those remarks. First, there was a statement that came from Governor Cuomo's spokesperson. Then Cuomo commented and responded on Twitter. And now he is speaking directly with reporters. In a phone call this afternoon, Cuomo told reporters that his comments were inartful, adding, quote, "Of course America is great. And of course America has always been great. My family is evidence of American greatness." Cuomo made his initial controversial comment at a bill signing in New York.
We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great. We have not reached greatness. We will reach greatness when every American is fully engaged.
He went on to talk about inequality. A spokesperson later said the governor believes America is great, but that it has not reached its maximum potential. President Trump says Cuomo made a career-threatening statement, writing on Twitter this morning, quote, "When a politician admits that we're not going to make America great again, there doesn't seem to be much reason to ever vote for him." And that is just one of 3 tweets President Trump posted today referring to Cuomo. He accused the New York Democratic governor of having a meltdown in a tweet on Wednesday. In response, Governor Cuomo tweeted this: "At Real Donald Trump, what you say would be great again would not be great at all. We will not go back to discrimination, segregation, sexism, isolationism, racism, or the KKK." Now, Cuomo might be walking back some of his statements, or at least trying to clarify them, but he's not walking away from his criticism of President Trump. In that phone call with reporters, he said that Trump's policies are anti-American, and as for President Trump personally, he called him vindictive, small, and petty. Trace?
And Ellison, the governor's opponents are also using the comment against him.
Right, yeah, his Republican opponents as well as those on the left. His primary challenger, Democrat Cynthia Nixon, told New York One, well, she essentially suggested that the governor is a bit of a phony. She told New York One this, quote, "This is just another example of Andrew Cuomo trying to figure out what a progressive sounds like and missing by a mile." Recent polls put Cuomo about 30 points ahead of Nixon in the gubernatorial race. As for future political plans, Cuomo says right now he does not have any plans to run for office in 2020. Trace?
Ellison Barber live for us in New Jersey. Ellison, thank you. Updating Fox top story now on a live look outside the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of D.C., where not long ago, jurors in Paul Manafort's trial asked the judge to leave at 5 p.m. tonight after deliberating for more than 12 hours this week. Let's bring in Anahita Setagatfar. She's an attorney practicing civil law in both state and federal courts. So the jury apparently... Somebody has an event. Judge, can we leave at 5 o'clock? Does it tell you anything?
That's
no verdict
big
today?
Deal. That's no big deal. That happens frequently. These jurors have lives outside of this trial, so they just wanted to let the court know that we want to deliberate until 5 p.m. and then we want to be excused. Now, could they still come back with a verdict? It's possible. There's still a few more hours, so we just don't know.
Doesn't look likely. And you saw the defense attorneys kind of walk out. They didn't say a word yesterday when the jury asked the question about, hey, can you redefine reasonable doubt for us? And these documents, can we put these documents to these different counts? And the judge said, no, you can't do that. And the defense attorney said, this is a big win for Manafort.
Well, the defense is clearly very confident in their case, and we know that because they didn't put on a case. They didn't put on any witnesses, and that tells me that they believe that the prosecution simply has not met their burden of proof. The burden is on the state or the prosecution to prove all of their claims beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the defense is saying, look, we've done enough through our cross-examination, and they have, to poke holes in the prosecution's case that we don't even need to put on any witnesses. And that's a very powerful message to send to a jury.
Here's what I thought. When they were talking about the documents and putting the different documents toward the different counts, and the judge said no, I thought, you know, the prosecution came in and said, this is what you need to focus on, these documents. Forget about Rick Gates. He was their star witness, and then he kind of fell apart in court. Don't count on Gates, count on these documents. And now these people are in the jury room thinking, I don't know which documents go for which count. And that is not good for the prosecution.
That is not good, and the prosecution should have laid that out for the jury. This is a very complex case. You're talking about 18 criminal counts, hundreds and hundreds of pages of exhibits, financial documents, tax documents. As an attorney, I might even be confused. And so they sent a message to the court that they're a little bit confused. The prosecution should have explained that. That is not the job of the judge to do. So the judge was right in not doing that for them.
Let me give you the numbers here. Prosecution called 27 witnesses. The defense called zero, right? Prosecutor put up 388 pieces of evidence. The defense put up 10 pieces of evidence, 18 counts. And you look at all this, and Paul Manafort needs to run the table because he gets convicted on 1, 2, 3. He's still going to spend a dozen years in prison.
Yes, he'll spend time in prison if he gets convicted even on a few of these counts. But the defense did a really good strategy, Trace. What they did is they essentially put the prosecution's star witness on trial, right? So in their cross-examination, they said, look, he is not being truthful. He's told lies. He's admitted that he's embezzled money. He even stole from Manafort here. And more importantly, they elicited, and the jurors heard this, he got a sweetheart deal by the prosecution to testify against Manafort. And that is very telling. He was facing, Trace, up to 100 years on all the charges. Now, 10 years, and he may even walk. So the question to the jury is, could he be lying? Does he have an incentive to not tell the truth? And I think the defense did a very, masterful job of proving that his credibility is not so great.
We've kind of always said, except for OJ, the longer the jury goes, the better it is for the defendant.
Okay, from my trial experience, the cases I've tried, I've never lost, but I digress. You never lost.
Never lost. And did I say I've never lost?
Never, not once. But I will say that you can never tell the verdict that the jury is going to return based on the amount of time they've deliberated. That is impossible to do. So we really just have to wait and see. And they're doing the best that they can do. The jurors are in there. They're deliberating. They're asking questions. This is how our system is supposed to work. So we can't rush them. We can't say, why haven't they rendered a verdict yet? It's really only been a day and a half in a very, very complex case. It's a federal trial. So let them do their job.
I got to go 5 seconds. Guilty? Innocent?
I can't predict. I can't predict, but I think that we'll soon find out.
But I hear you've never lost. So
never lost a case, Trace.
Anahita Setagatfar, great of you to join us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the Trump administration pulling more than $200 million of funding for projects in Syria. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that money will go toward other foreign policy priorities. This comes as the administration considers taking back about $3 billion in foreign spending. Rich Edson is live for us at the State Department with more. Rich.
Good afternoon, Trace. And on Syria specifically, the State Department argues it now actually has more money to help stabilize Syria, to use money to help get rid of mines in that country, to help with fresh water and electricity. That's because the Trump administration has secured some $300 million from other countries in that effort. But still, the removal of U.S. funds is meeting opposition, particularly from Democrats. This is from Bob Menendez, Senator, top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, says in a statement, quote, "The U.S. Congress funded Syria stabilization programs, recognizing our nation's lasting stake in the stability of the region, and to avoid the short-sighted strategic mistake of failing to finish the fight after investing U.S. lives and tax dollars into a military campaign." The administration says the U.S. is still the overall lead in these efforts. The administration also says that it's going to spend this $200 million for other foreign policy priorities, though will not answer as to what specific programs it will be funding with that money, Trace.
And Rich, the administration is talking about cutting $3 billion in foreign aid.
That's right. This is an effort from the Trump administration. As you know, the administration has already implemented this money, or gone to spend this money, appropriated this money. This has also been an effort by the administration to pull back that funding. But Congress, when it comes to foreign aid, and the State Department has always spent more money. So this is an effort to try to get that money back. But already the administration is running into opposition from Democrats and Republicans. Trace?
Rich Edson live for us at the State Department. Rich, thank you. Well, coming up, a mystery motive in Colorado. A husband accused of killing his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters. Investigators say they're trying to figure out what could have driven him to snap and murder his family. Next.
There's little rest